Good evening, and welcome to the Voice of the People. My name is Lois DeMayo, and I will be hosting the show this evening. And with me, I have a very special guest, Grandpa Suzio. No, former State Senator Len Suzio. Welcome, Len.
It's great to be here. And by the way, if I start losing my voice, we can have my granddaughter, Auden, come on, and you could interview her.
Oh.
She's 7 years old, and she wants to give the report about sledding conditions at Hunter Golf Course.
As long as it's not about the restaurant.
Yeah, yes.
Len, when you were state senator, I know a big topic of yours was the early release program.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Nothing was done, really, on that.
Yeah. Well, the law was passed in 2011 when it was introduced as a surprise piece of legislation at midnight. It was deliberately done by the Democrats so that the media would be gone. Nobody would really know about it. And it's a piece of legislation that basically is a get-out-of-jail pass for convicts who are serving time for crimes committed here in Connecticut. And when they introduced it, and it literally was around midnight in June of 2011, the Senate Republican leader, Senator McKinley at the time, was alarmed because when he read the content of the bill, he realized that any crime at all in Connecticut, you could be guilty of the worst crimes and you'd be eligible to get out of prison early. So he got on the floor of the Senate and gave a very impassioned speech against the law and saying, look, if you're going to pass this, at least there should be some specifically heinous crimes that are not eligible for early release, like first-degree rape or capital felony murder. So the Democrats reluctantly added about 6 crimes that would not be eligible for early release, but every other crime in Connecticut was still qualified for discharge early into the program. So they passed it, as I say, in June of 2011, and I remember sitting on the floor of the Senate thinking, wow, somebody's going to lose their life. There's going to be terrible tragedy before people realize that this law is very bad. And I didn't know at the time, but only the next year, 11 months later, right here in Meriden, Connecticut, Ibrahim Ghazal was working, an elderly store owner was working at his convenience mart on East Main Street when Frankie the Razor Resto came in and robbed him at gunpoint. And Mr. Ghazal handed over all the money in the cash register, but that didn't stop Resto from pointing the gun right at him from only a few feet away, and he murdered him in cold blood. It was caught on the camera. There's no denying that's what happened. And Resto should have been in prison. He had been in prison, but was let loose early courtesy of this program. So it became kind of more of a cause celebrate for me because it was up close and personal. The murder occurred only 4 or 5 blocks from where I live off of East Main Street. And I got to know the Ghazal family very well. I saw what they suffered as a result of the murder of their father. And I felt very passionate about it. So I started fighting the program, trying to get it changed. And when I lost re-election back in 2012, I kept on campaigning against it, nevertheless, as a member of the public like you would. And I was happy that some of my former colleagues introduced legislation to change the law. And they were not successful in getting big changes, but in 2015, they did get the law modified where they added persistent dangerous felony offenders and persistent dangerous sex offenders as not eligible for early release. It's hard to believe, but in the first 4 years of the law.
Now, wasn't he one of those?
He was a dangerous felony offender.
Even to his fellow inmates?
Oh yeah, he was notorious. Police Chief Cassette told me that in his 30 years or more than 3 decades of policing, he was one of the top, most dangerous, violent criminals he'd ever met. And they knew it. They knew when they released him that he was dangerous. So that, again, really gave me the initiative and the fire to keep pursuing it, even though I lost re-election. And I pursued it as a member of the public, and we eventually got at least those 2 other crimes added. But it's still allowing a lot of violent criminals out of jail. So I then decided, well, one thing is in 2015, the legislature passed a law saying the Department of Correction is supposed to, every quarter, release a report on the program. How many criminals were released, what they were convicted of, how many were readmitted, and what crime they committed to be readmitted, things like that in the nature of recidivism. But the DOC didn't do anything when they were mandated to do this. So I went up and held a press conference in Hartford and said, this is wrong. The DOC is breaking the law. This is real irony. The law enforcement agency intended to enforce the law is breaking the law themselves. And they're not disclosing all these terrible statistics that show the program's a terrible failure.
Wasn't that on the stairs of the state capitol?
Yes, yeah.
But wasn't the then governor taking credit for it?
Oh, Governor Malloy you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, Governor Malloy didn't like to change the law one iota. And to me, I think the primary reason, there were two reasons for the law. One is they wanted to lower the prison population to save money. And number two was it gets into racial identity politics because a lot of legislators, minority legislators in particular, think that the laws are biased against them, and that's why there's a disproportionate number of prisoners or inmates in our prisons who are minorities. There may be some truth to that, but if someone still commits a horrible crime, they should be behind bars for the protection of the public. And I point out that while there's a disproportionate amount of crimes committed by minorities, there's also a disproportionate amount of victims who are minorities. Minority on minority crime is much more prevalent than minority on non-minority crime. So I think my focus is on sympathy for the minority victims of criminals, and my opposition or my opponents are more focused on sympathy for the criminals who commit these violent crimes. And I think I've got the right priority. But be that as it may, I knew at the time, since the DOC was not disclosing the information that they were mandated to do by law, I decided to get the information myself and start publishing it if the DOC wouldn't do it. I actually approached the DOC and I said, why aren't you doing this? And they said, well, we don't really know what the law mandates. We don't really understand the law, and the system, the data processing system is so complicated, we really can't even generate the information that the law may require. So that basically gave me the incentive through the Freedom of Information Act, to demand that they hand over all the inmate records to me in electronic form so that I could do something to analyze it. So they did. They gave me millions of records of the thousands of criminals that were behind bars in Connecticut prisons. And they didn't know that I had the capability, along with my brother-in-law, to create computer programs to go through all this information and start compiling it and organizing it so it's meaningful. Because it's very easy to get lost with millions of records involved. And so we started, back in 2016, we started issuing reports on what the experience was of the program. How many inmates were released and then reconvicted and readmitted for having committed another crime, what kind of crimes they committed, how many were violent crimes, and that kind of a thing. And so every 6 months I have a standing agreement with the Department of Correction that they give me updated data. And every 6 months I then release that information to the public. I know that one thing that gave you the incentive or the idea to interview me was an op-ed that I wrote in the Record Journal a few weeks ago, summarizing some of the key statistics that I think are shocking to the public when you look at them. And they prove that the law is a scandalous failure, in my opinion.
Well, you know what? How do they earn these credits? Now, he was
Resto?
a dangerous criminal in prison.
Right. He set his jail cell on fire. He was breaking prison rules all the time.
How in the heck did he earn his credits to get out?
Well, when they passed the law, they passed it so it was retroactive, 5 years. And the DOC had to go through every criminal record and decide how many of these credits to administer over the last 5 years, and then it was going to be applied going forward as well. And at that time, there was about 18,000 inmates in Connecticut prisons. So
But isn't that on good behavior?
it's supposed to be. And in fact, Resto was denied parole at least twice by the Board
yeah.
of Pardons and Parole because his behavior was so bad in prison. But when they passed this law, they gave him the credits nonetheless. And then when push came to shove, his sentence got reduced to the point where they had to let him out. And I asked Undersecretary of Criminal Justice Mike Lawler, what happened here? He was, why did you let this guy go, even though he was extremely violent, and his prison record proved that, let alone his criminal record. And Undersecretary Lawler said, we had to let him go. I'll never forget that. He said, we had to let him go. And I said, you had to let him go? Why? He said, because of time served. When we applied the risk reduction credits to his sentence, it was reduced to the point where we had to discharge him. It's as if he served all his time. And even though they knew he was very dangerous. So again, it underscores what a disaster the law is. Mr. Gazal paid for it with his life. His families will suffer for the rest of their lives. They lost their father.
I know we had the son on here.
Yeah, that's right, Fabio, right.
Time. Yeah.
So I promised the family that I would fight to get the law changed until it finally was changed. And that was, my goodness, that's going on 8 years ago now, 7, 8 years ago. And so I'm keeping the fight up. And one thing I always felt was information is valuable. It's important for people to understand what the results are of this disastrous program. And the only way for them to know it, since the DOC, the Department of Correction, is not releasing the information that they're supposed to be doing by law, then I'll do it. And the numbers are indeed unbelievable and shocking. Over 40,000 criminals have been discharged early into the program so far, and almost 17,000 violent crimes have been committed by them after they supposedly were reformed and received their, quote, risk reduction credits. They were let loose into the community, feel free to maraud and roam through our streets and our neighborhoods, and basically threaten the life and safety of our family and friends. And the numbers, as I say, are daunting. There's something like 155 murders and several hundred rapes that have been committed by inmates who had, again, participated in the program, supposedly were reformed by the program, and were discharged early because of their participation in the program, but they resumed their life of violent crime. And when you look at the sheer numbers of violent crimes, again, you take murder and rape, if you go back and compute it and say, well, over the 7 years that the program has been in effect, what's the experience been? It's one murder or rape every 7.7 days. So almost every week there's a murder or rape being committed by an inmate or a former inmate who had been convicted of crime and now was discharged back into the population and has resumed a life of violent crime, raping and killing people. And there's thousands of other crimes that have been committed as well.
I'm going to stop you right there for a minute because, as you know, we just lost a close friend of ours, a party member, a woman who was the candidate for Area 1 on We the
City
People
Council.
ticket and the Republican ticket, Geetha Cottrell. Background in law enforcement. She was eager to get started in, working with you on this program. She saw no need for this program whatsoever. So, with that, I'd just like to have a few seconds of silence in honor of Geetha.
I would just say quickly, I knew her. I thought she was a great woman. I would hope that she would be elected to the city council. She would have been a terrific addition. And she was a good, gentle spirit. And I think it would have been great.
Gentle was the word.
Yeah.
it was a sudden thing and it was shocking, um, but we just want to remember Geetha Cottrell. She was, her background, she was an Army veteran, and she was the first woman policeman elected or hired in the
Hamden,
city of Hamden.
Yeah.
She was the first female police officer. She worked 5 years undercover for State Department. I don't know which, but so she had a law enforcement background, and boy, she would have given you a lot of help in your endeavor to fight this program.
I have yet to meet a law enforcement officer who thinks the program is working as it should, or they all consider it to be a failure. Even the DOC officers, the Department of Correction officers, have told me, but unfortunately they won't go public with it, that the program is played and gamed by the inmates. And even inmates have told me that, by the way. I know a number of inmates, which ironically, some of them I've become friends with. I actually communicate with them periodically, and some of them are truly rehabilitating their lives, but they did commit a crime, and they should serve the time, and their motivation to avoid crime in the future should be because it's wrong. If your motivation is because you get out of jail early, the incentive is gone once you're out of jail. If anything, you know, if you're readmitted for another crime, you're going to get out early again. It's actually an incentive to commit more crime. So I think the law is a catastrophic failure. And again, we've had enough experience now that you can look at the numbers and say, well, if there was any doubt about how it would turn out, it should be unequivocally clear now that the program is a catastrophic failure with thousands of violent crimes being committed.
But it's a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Yeah. And by the way, I'll tell you something that I know that's particularly apropos right now. As you and I sit here tonight talking, only in the last week there was the murders that occurred in London on the bridge, and the criminal who did that had been a convicted terrorist. He was someone who was convicted of acts of terrorism in London, and he was let loose from prison early. So that made me think, I wonder in Connecticut what would happen. And so I checked it out. We actually have 3 or 4 crimes in Connecticut that are acts of terrorism crimes, and each one of them you're eligible to get out of prison early. So you could be a terrorist here in Connecticut. You could contaminate the public water supply, or attack people with a gun or a knife or whatever, and you would still be eligible for early release under our laws. I'm totally shocked about that. That's a crime or a series of crimes that should never be eligible in these days where terrorism is a big problem. Yeah. I think most people listening to this show would probably be shocked to know a terrorist, someone convicted of committing an act of terrorism in Connecticut can get out of prison early. That's a shocker.
How do they earn these credits?
Well, they're supposed to participate in programs that educate them and train them to deal with the issues that have caused their criminal misbehavior. But the problem is a lot of the courses have nothing to do with it. I remember when I first became aware of the law, the then victim advocate, Michelle Cruz, teamed up with me, and she had looked at these courses. She said, some of the courses are just a joke. There's a course like on the history of the Philippines. You take that course, you get early release credits. And not only that, you get credits just for signing up and waiting to take the course, let alone taking the course itself. And there's no test afterwards or anything like that. So there's no proof that the system works. If anything, the experience proves it's an abject failure. So if you have
several criminals, all convicted of different types of crimes, and you have one program that is addressing them all.
Well, they do have, I looked at the book, they have literally hundreds, potentially hundreds of courses that they could take. One of them is like, what's it called? Puppy nurture, I think is what it was. They're going to bring puppies into prison, and you could cuddle and take care of the puppies, and that makes you eligible for early release credits. I know, it's like you gotta be kidding me. So I think the public would be really aghast at some of the stuff. And as I say, when they implemented the program, it was retroactive. So you can't motivate somebody for something they did years ago. The time's already passed. When you motivate someone, you're affecting their future behavior, not their past behavior. But that didn't stop them from awarding thousands and thousands of days of early release credit to criminals over the previous 5 years, in which the program didn't even exist. It's kind of like, almost like a world of make-believe sometimes. It's kind of shocking when you look at it and think,
this whole
it's
thing,
outrageous.
I looked at, the figures that you pointed out. It's a joke.
Yeah. Thousands. Again, it's not just a few crimes here or there. When you compute the
16,750 violent crimes have been committed by convicts after they were released early from prison.
Yes, that comes out to 6.6 violent crimes every day for almost 8 years committed by convicts who had been let loose from prison early and returned to a life of crime. So there's not an exception, like one incident here or there. It's every day, and it's multiple times every day.
I can't believe it. And these are just Connecticut
Yes.
people.
Right. Oh, by the way, too, when I cite that number at 16,750 crimes, that's really kind of an understatement because for example, there's a former prisoner who was incarcerated. He had been let loose from jail early, and within a couple months, he was arrested for committing 3 murders, not 1 murder. But I count him only once in the data. So when we talk about this, we're really not talking about the complete number of crimes committed by them, only 1 crime per inmate, basically, at a time.
Wow.
So 3 murders counted as 1 in our data.
That is something.
Yeah.
That is something. And
maybe we shouldn't have this show broadcast because now if there's a potential terrorist in Connecticut watching this show, they may say,
they're going to go after us.
Yeah, it's like, they're not so tough on terrorism here in Connecticut.
Yeah. Either that or they're going to come after you and me.
Oh, boy. Where do you live? Let's see, off in South Meriden. Okay.
I live in Orange, Connecticut. Yeah, right. Well, a good portion of these violent crimes are murders.
Yes, yeah.
Which is a capital offense.
Yeah. Acts of murder, homicide, and manslaughter.
Now, when they go back to prison, does this program start all over for them again?
Oh, yeah. Anyone, in fact, there's a number of the inmates who have been readmitted numerous times. So not just once, but in fact, I think I was looking at the data, and there's been a few people who were basically admitted, released early, readmitted for another crime, back and forth. The record holder, I think, is 7 times so far. So they've been in and out. It's really a revolving door for some of these characters. And it's just. And now, by the way, it's getting worse because with the budget problems that they have, they're cutting back on these programs. They don't have the staffing or the personnel to administer these programs. So that's what they're doing. They're cutting the spending on the programs that are supposed to rehabilitate these prisoners. And there's a really good book written by an inmate, Mike Leibowitz. He's in prison in Connecticut for some violent crimes he committed, and his length of sentence was over 30 years. So it wasn't a penny ante crime that he committed. And Mike is one of those inmates who has really reformed himself. No thanks to this program, but he's really, I'm convinced he's totally reformed, but he's still in prison. He's not going to get out for a few more years. He wrote a book called Down the Rabbit Hole, in which he basically says that the Department of Correction itself has such corruption behind the walls of prison that it actually reinforces prisoner criminal behavior instead of discouraging it. And he's not saying everybody behind the prison walls that's in the DOC is bad, but he says there's enough of it going on that it reinforces the criminal mind that you can get away with murder, basically, because they see some of the officials inside the prison walls breaking all the rules and not getting punished for it. So it reinforces this whole idea that there's no consequence if you break the law.
Okay. But now, is he eligible for early release?
No, his crime was committed before that law became, because he goes back about 20 years.
Oh, okay.
Now, he is eligible for a different form called statutory good time. Connecticut had statutory good time up until 1994, and then they abolished it. And so from 1994 to 2011, the only way you could get out of jail early is you went to the Board of Pardons and Paroles, you petitioned and said, I would like to get out of jail early. Look at my prison record. I'm a model prisoner, and I've reformed. I'm born again, or whatever. And then the Board of Pardons and Paroles would make the decision about whether you really could and should be discharged from prison early. So Mike is he committed this crime, at least over 20 years ago. So my recollection is he's covered by the previous law, and he could approach them and ask them for time off, and then they would base their decision on his prison record and what their impressions were of whether he's really reformed or not. But they're not constrained. Like the early release program, you have to award these credits if people take the courses and stuff. So once it's awarded, you can't take them back except for cause. So if you think Frankie Resto might be dangerous in public, but you don't take the credits back, then he has to be released, and that's what happened. It's a disaster. It's a terribly unjust law, and it's a law that really makes the community a riskier place, a more dangerous place to be in, because there's thousands of criminals on the streets that should be behind bars. And
so
that's
they're doing this to save money.
That's definitely one of the primary factors. So again, maybe you could say at the beginning, well, let's see what happens and let's see what the results are. But the results are in now. It's almost 8 years from September 2011, which is when it first became effective. My data goes through June of 2019, so I'm just short of 8 years, and I'll get updated data at the end of December again once we pass year end. And I'm certain it's just going to continue to demonstrate that the program is a spectacular failure and puts people's lives and safety in jeopardy, needlessly.
Yeah.
So, but Malloy would brag about, the prison population's down. Well, of course it's down, because you're letting people out by the boatloads,
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, we're letting the prison population down, therefore crime must be down. But no, it's the population's down primarily because you're letting people out of jail a lot sooner than they would have been out.
Right, right. I just heard something on the radio today about Weicker. They called him, what did they call him? The Satan of Connecticut. In other words, he destroyed Connecticut by himself.
Yeah, the income tax.
With the income tax, of course.
Yeah.
And I was mentioning it to one of the girls at work today, and she said that she doesn't ever remember them not being a state income tax.
Yeah, 28 years ago.
They're younger, and of course, but what did they call him? The destroyer.
Yeah, well, he basically...
Weicker the destroyer.
Yeah. He was an enabler. The passage of the income tax opened the floodgates for a huge surge of money that wasn't there before. And every year now we're collecting like $9-10 billion of state income tax that we didn't have back 27, 28 years ago.
But where is it?
There's a black hole up there in the middle of the legislative office building. If anybody wants to see where the money goes, just go up to the LOB and it just gets sucked in. I always think of that Ross Perot line when he ran for president back in ’92, was it? And he talked about that sucking sound south of the border. There's a sucking sound up in the legislature, and it's they're just sucking the money out taxpayers' wallets. And Connecticut's paying the dear price for that because
Sure they are.
Yeah, Connecticut's economy is back where it was in 2007, 12 years ago. It's hard to believe. So the economy is shrinking, and we're like, if we're not last, we're like next to last in terms of economic growth among all the 50 states. So
Well,
you would think somebody would think something's going on here. What's wrong?
economic growth. You know, when I here look at all the buildings going up in Meriden, for instance, business-friendly Meriden, and yet it took that guy on East Main Street, the old my dad's, how long to be able to open that?
Yeah.
Because
Oh
they
my
kept
gosh.
throwing in.
One condition after the other, one objection.
Right, but
yeah.
this is business-friendly Meriden, you know. But I'm looking at all the buildings being built, and Geetha was starting a petition about all the
really?
low-income housing.
Oh boy.
It's unbelievable where they think it's going to be mixed income. I'm not going there and paying $12.50 a month for an apartment that the guy next door with the same exact apartment is paying $60 a month because my taxes are paying the rest of that.
Yep.
So basically, I'm renting 2 apartments, which I can't afford. But people forget this when they say, "Oh, never mind. You know, it's a government loan, and
Oh no.
you know, we got this from the state. We got this from the government. It's all tax money."
Oh yeah. Well, I think you and I have had a conversation about so-called affordable housing in Connecticut, which is very unaffordable. When I was on the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee, we had a subcommittee hearing about all the departments were coming saying we need $100 million for this, $200 million for that, and the woman, the commissioner who was head of the Connecticut Housing Department, she came and was asking for something like $160 million, something like that. And I was looking at all the documentation that she provided at the time, and it was a kind of a recap of all the affordable housing that had been built in the previous couple of years. And I was stunned when I looked at the numbers because the costs were astronomical, and I was shocked by what I saw. So I asked her, I said, so what's the average cost for an apartment that's affordable? And she said, well, we shoot for $250,000, $250,000. Then she said, sometimes it's more than that, and sometimes a little bit less, but we try to target and keep it around $250,000. I was like flabbergasted because I said, like in Meriden, 90% of the houses are under $250,000, I'm certain, but taxpayers are being asked to subsidize apartments that cost that much. And one of the most outrageous deals I saw was Liberty Gardens, a 10-unit apartment complex in Hartford that was purchased and renovated for $4.7 million. Now, that's for 10 units. So what's that come out to per unit? $470,000 per
yeah.
unit. And they're renting out for $85 to $115 a month. I mean, how in the world can you look taxpayers in the eye and just say, hey, we're subsidizing housing that costs, over $400,000?
We thank you for your contribution.
It's like shocking.
Yeah.
I think the people of Connecticut would be up in an uproar. They should be. But you see, this stuff is not known, generally speaking. A few people will watch your show and see it and be in disbelief. And so
I'm looking
it continues.
at Meriden. It's almost like the dumping grounds. Southington, they're making a big deal out of it now because they are building a 30-unit low-income housing. 30 units. I mean, Meriden takes that in on one floor.
Yeah,
you know,
hundreds and hundreds, yeah.
And when they were first starting to build them, I asked Mr. Rohde, who was mayor at the time, why all of this, why knock down the mills and put 2 new buildings up there? And he says, well, these are all going to have storefronts. And I says, yeah, but these people are not going to be able to shop at these stores.
Yeah.
Oh, he said, white tablecloth restaurants, high-end boutiques. I said, who's going to shop there? There's not that much spare money left.
Right. Yeah, the locals are,
Shop there.
unfortunately, they're poor by definition, so they don't have a lot of discretionary income.
The one on Colony Street's 2 years old, and there's not a store rented yet.
Yeah.
2
Yeah.
years time.
Look, I think everyone watching this show believes that people deserve some kind of decent housing, but it's got to be reasonable and realistic. And units that cost $250,000 are just not reasonable in my book. That subsidized. I mean, if you're going to live in that kind of expensive housing, you should be able to afford it on your own. So it's something that is going unexamined, and the legislators don't question it. They just rubber stamp it, and it goes on. And
they insist on calling it mixed income housing, and it's not. It's not. And I don't begrudge these people for having a place to live, but enough is enough. I mean, now it's the Record Journal spot, all of those going up.
Yeah.
Next, it's going to be the old hospital,
Yeah.
Meriden Hospital. How much do you need in one town?
Yeah. One thing that kind of, every day I think about this, is all the trains coming through town. All those units are literally virtually on the tracks. I mean, they're within a stone's throw. And we have 30 some odd trains a day now, and they all, you can hear their whistles late into the night. And I'm fortunate, I live almost a mile away. But if I were living right there, literally within a few yards of the tracks, and these whistles are going off at all times of day,
Yeah.
I'd be pretty unhappy about that.
That's another thing, too. I mean, the fast train,
Yeah.
that's great. You take the train up to Hartford to go work at Travelers. Now, how do you get from the railroad station to Travelers? So now you got to hop a bus or
Yeah.
take a cab.
It takes a while.
And it's not going to be as easy as what they make it out to be.
Yeah.
And coming through town, we have no fire departments on the west side except Chamberlain Highway.
Yeah.
Now they've turned the South Meriden Volunteer into Engine 1. Because they were all on the other side of the tracks. But
The train
you
comes
have
through
a
and you gotta
major
wait.
fire over there, and the fire engines are going to have to go all the way up to Camp Street. That's the only
Over there,
place where
yeah.
there's.
The
Can they
hump.
make that swing onto Colony Street? But it's taken way out of the way for an
Yeah.
emergency
Yeah.
type thing. I don't think there was a lot of thought going into.
No, I once questioned Rhodey about this back when I was senator, and I said, because I was worried about the traffic flow through town. I kept on raising that as an issue because
Yeah.
with all these increased number of trains, you're going to have traffic backing up East Main Street and along Hanover Street. And the traffic flow studies indicated that at certain times it could get backed up quite a bit. And he responded to me by saying, oh, people are not going to drive into town. They're going to take their bikes into town. And he was serious about it. I was flabbergasted that he would say something like that. But that was his rationale, that why there wouldn't be the big backups of traffic because of the trains. And I've been down there a few times when trains have come through, and it does back up.
Sure it does. Sure it does, especially at peak hours.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm certain a lot of your listeners can. I was there last month, and I was on Hanover Street, and it was backed up a long way down Hanover Street because a train was coming through, and the gate's down, and if the train's at the station, they keep them down. They
That's
don't
right.
let them up. until the train goes by.
And this fast train bit,
Yeah, yeah.
how, starting out from Wallingford, how do you gain enough speed to be fast tracking before you hit Meriden?
Yeah, I forgot
You're
now.
there in a couple of minutes.
I know that during the line between New Haven and Hartford, I think there was something like 67 is a number to 6 in my head, at-grade crossings. So you can't go barreling through those crossings at
No.
100 miles an hour. You got to slow down. So I don't know if
You
the
wouldn't
trains ever
have
get up
time
to
to gain
speed.
enough speed
Yeah. Yep.
before the next station came up. Gee, what else can we talk about that's wrong?
Well, the
in
tolls.
Meriden?
We should
The
talk about the tolls
tolls.
because that's a hot topic right now.
Yeah.
And as you know, and your audience knows, I believe anyways, that the governor has been pushing tolls all year, and he's changed his position about, what form of tolls. And we are now, as you and I are here today, they've come full cycle where he and the Democrats are pushing for trucks-only tolls. And this was something that was announced a week or two ago. That this was something the governor campaigned on, and then as soon as he was elected, he basically rescinded that and just said, "Oh, I was mistaken. We need tolls for everybody."
Yeah.
And he backed out of that, and of course, there's been a battle ever since. And so they've come back full cycle from tolls on every car over 80 gantries to 50 gantries to 14 gantries, and now it's just going to be the trucks over 12 gantries. And the problem with that is that anybody that thinks that they're going to stop there is got to be, has a hole in their head, because the infrastructure for the truck tolls is exactly the same infrastructure for automobiles. So once they put up the gantries to hit the trucks, all they have to do is just hit a little switch and they can change it to cars as well. And it's going to be irresistible. We all know that. If you spent a few $100 million on the toll gantries and there's tens of thousands of cars going by every day not paying anything, they're going to make that the case for doing that, for tolling those cars as well as the big bad truckers.
You can see, I can see both sides. We are the only state where they can go through toll-free.
That's not true. You can go through Massachusetts toll-free. Just go up I-91. You go from Connecticut through Massachusetts all the way up to New Hampshire, and you don't see a single toll. So you can go through all the Massachusetts without a toll. There is the Massachusetts Turnpike, of course,
Yeah.
which goes from east to west, but unless you're on the Mass Turnpike, there's plenty of interstate highways in Massachusetts that don't have tolls. And you would think if tolls are the panacea, why is Massachusetts having just on one interstate road and not on all the others? And they know that they don't do as well with the federal money if they put tolls up, so they don't. The Mass Turnpike's an exception to the rule because it was kind of grandfathered in. It was built before the Eisenhower interstate highways were finished.
Well, we used to have tolls too.
That's right.
In Connecticut, and
Yep, the Connecticut Turnpike
all it
had
took
tolls.
was one. But as residents, you knew how to get around it.
Yeah.
You knew which roads to take to not have to go through these tolls every day, so that it just would catch out-of-state people all the time. But with this, and his campaign was no tolls.
That's right.
And he no sooner got in that he started on the tolls. But you can't just have them for trucks, like you said. But this man, on Route 5?
Well, they won't put them on Route 5. They're going to be on, they talked about 9, but they're going to take, I don't think they're going to do them on 9 now. They're going to just be on, the way they're talking about it now, are 12 locations where there's usually bridges or something like that. But again, I'm afraid that once the infrastructure's up,
Once it starts.
it's going to be irresistible for them because there's no additional cost to put cars through it.
That's right.
So it's just, it's a two-step dance, basically.
Yeah.
And I think that's one reason why I think there is and will continue to be overwhelming opposition to tolls of any form in Connecticut, because It's just a setup for tolling everybody. And it's interesting, as you and I are talking today, there's a recording going around now of our local state senator, Abrams, who was quoted on this tape as saying she supports trucks-only tolls. And then she spews forth a lot of the nonsense that's not true about, Connecticut's roads and bridges. And so she was one of the senators that were sitting on the fence. I wasn't certain which way she was going to go, but she announced in her telephone conference call the other day, the town hall teleconference that she sponsored, she said unequivocally she supports tolls on trucks only.
Well, don't forget, during the campaign, they're going to say anything they think the people want to hear.
Right. So it's going to be important for people to call her, because this is going to be a very close vote again. And her vote could be one of the decisive votes. So I hope, in fact, I'll look into the camera to say, if you're watching this show tonight, just call Senator Abrams' office right away, and you won't speak to her, but leave a message for her or her staff saying you oppose tolls in any form whatsoever, trucks only or trucks and cars. We know that that trucks only tolls will lead eventually to trucks
Sure.
tolls on everyone.
Yeah. Okay, now what other structures can we pick apart tonight?
How much more time do we have?
How about the recent elections?
Oh boy, yeah, that was kind of a disappointment. I'm happy that, I guess one piece of good news is that the control of the Board of Education is now completely changed for the first time in 30 or 40 years, from Democrat to Republican control. And it's not a slim majority of 5-4, it's actually 6-3, which is pretty firm. So that's encouraging news. Now we'll see what the Republican leadership will do. Hopefully it'll make a difference in terms of Board of Ed policies that the public will appreciate. But of course the City Council was a disappointment. I think we were hoping that we'd pick up more seats in the City Council. And as you were going through the numbers with me, the We the People Party lost 2 positions, I guess it was, and the Republicans picked up 1. So we're looking at, it's basically a 9-3 split on the City Council now. So the Democrats continue to rule the day with a comfortable margin as well.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to say. It's like, I think all of us thought, well, last year with the budget, the controversy over the budget, and with Mike Carabetta starting a petition which eventually wound up with 6,000 people opposed to the budget because it had too much spending, and it was like 120 people for it. You would think that would have translated itself at the polls, but Mike did get elected, which was good, but no one else seemed to benefit from it. That it's truly unfortunate that if you can't change things unless you change the people who are there running the city, and so we're going to just get more of the same, unfortunately.
Yeah. And really, there's I'm saying there's not much you can do about it, but there is.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to start from
Turn
day
out.
one.
Mm-hmm.
The Democrats, don't forget, the control that they have
Mm-hmm.
is really not something that they've earned.
But they've got it.
Talk about
However,
early
but,
release,
yeah.
credits where
Right.
credits aren't due.
Yeah.
And I had one Democrat tell me,
Mm-hmm.
I asked, I said, gee, you were a Republican for years.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you change to Democrat? I got elected, didn't I?
Yeah. That's it. You can
I
get your
figured
amen
it's
ticket.
the only way you can get elected.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I thought the 6,000 signatures on that petition last year, every single one of them should have voted for a Republican or the We the People Party candidate, and that should have been enough to put a lot of people over the top. But whether those people showed up to vote or not, I don't know. I haven't had a chance to look at the actual vote and who did it.
Municipal elections is a poor gathering, which is unfortunate, but people don't think that they're
Well, I think
that important.
Yeah, I
you
think
know.
people are cynical. They just think, well, what difference does it make? And so they give up without
Yeah.
trying, and then it
Yeah.
becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because, well, I can't make anything change, and therefore I won't do anything, and therefore nothing does change. So I would say this. One of the lessons of the tolls debate is that people can make a difference, but you got to be highly motivated and organized and persistent. So the no tolls people, really, I know the people in that group pretty well. I'm going to say there's a core group of a dozen people or so that do most of the work. But they did sign or get 100,000 signatures on a petition. So you look and say, wow, a small cadre of people, a dozen or so people, highly motivated, highly organized, with a firm goal in mind to stop tolls in Connecticut, they've been successful. And even though the legislature is totally controlled by Democrats. They have the majority in the House, the comfortable majorities in the House and the Senate. They own the governorship. They own every single constitutional office, and yet they're having a hard time getting tolls passed. Well, it's because public opposition has been so vehement, and that's the way it's got to stay. We can't sit on our laurels. Hopefully, at the end of the year, they won't be successful with no tolls either, with truck tolls only.
Well, that's it. Now, obviously, the Republicans and we the people have to work together.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you'd split the votes right down the middle
Right.
and give them no opposition whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And our party, I know for a fact, our party, we've got to build up membership.
Mm-hmm.
And people will tell you they're just not interested in politics.
Right.
And yet they got the gripes,
Yeah.
the political gripes.
Yeah. You're right.
But to get them motivated,
Yeah. Well, see, Lois, I think you got to be able to show that some examples of success so people won't be so cynical. So, as I say, the no tolls people are a great example of that. They weren't sophisticated, polished politicians, and they didn't hire consultants or anything. It was just a group of highly motivated people who were upset, ordinary citizens who were upset about the prospect of tolls. So that's one example of how people can make a difference, in that the behemoth of government doesn't necessarily always win. And locally, I would say Mike Carabetta's victory was a good indication, because Mike didn't have any real political experience at all, but he got involved in that petition last year regarding the budget and got thousands of signatures on a petition. And I'm certain that's what won the office for him. So he's sitting there on the city council now, because even though he ran on a minority ticket, he still won because he took a high enough profile in the community that people recognized that he was a go-getter. And that was good.
Thing is,
So don't be discouraged. That's an important point.
and like I said before, we've lost 3 members due to
Yep.
illness and death just this year alone.
Right.
What I have to get out there and make known is it's open to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple Democrats. We've got some Republicans.
Right.
We've got some We the People registered. We're open to anybody, unaffiliates.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing. People get mixed up with
Yeah.
independent and
And
unaffiliated.
unaffiliated, yeah.
Independent is a party.
Mm-hmm.
Unaffiliates,
Is
you're
not.
not
You're
registered with
with
any
any
parties
party.
at all.
Yeah.
So, with that, we have meetings all the time. Anybody can get a hold of me. Anybody can get a hold of you.
Yeah.
Your party, you belong to the Republican Town Committee.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, last term,
Mm-hmm.
because we had 3 people on the city council,
Mm-hmm.
and the Republicans had 1, we were the minority party on the city council.
That's interesting.
But nobody wanted to take minority leadership. Walter didn't want it. Bob
gee.
Williams didn't want it. So
Wow.
they said, let Dan keep it.
Mm.
So that's how that worked. But now we are
That's
the minority
interesting.
party. So
Well, your message is important. That voting is important, but getting more involved, you can have a disproportionate impact because so few people do get involved. The few people who do put time in can make a big difference. And
Yeah.
again, I think Mike Carabetta going out there and getting 6,000 petition signatures, there's no doubt in my mind that was key to him winning the election. And he's on the city council now.
Well, I wondered about the name.
Carabetta, yeah.
He's
that's
not
true.
related at all.
Yeah, nope, not at all.
But that doesn't hurt either, you know.
Yeah.
But anyways, I know your grandchildren are here tonight watching this show.
Yes, they're waiting for pizza pie after this. And there's a little
All
girl over
right.
there named Auden Maris whose tummy is growling right now. I could tell. I can hear it over here.
From here. So I think we better get this show on the road.
Yeah.
We're coming to a close. Any final statements you'd like to make? I'm really intrigued by this article that you wrote.
Well, let's keep the pressure on. Number one, I encourage everyone who's watching this to get involved. Voting is, I say, important, but you can even make more of a difference by getting involved with either the We the People Party or the Republican Party. And just, it's not time-consuming. You go once a month to a meeting or something like that.
Once a month, I know.
Yeah, and you get to meet people and you get to learn things about what's going on. So I would encourage the audience to look into getting more involved in making a difference. And then I would say we're coming on the holidays. I just wish everybody that's listening and watching the show that may they have a very happy Christmas and a very safe New Year, and may it be a happy and holy Christmas too.
Well said.
Mm-hmm.
Well
you.
said. And you're inviting me to your Christmas party,
Oh,
right?
by all means. I'm going to have a bunch of
Absolutely.
wild grandchildren running around, so you won't be able to keep
Well,
up with them, Lois.
They can dress up as elves. I think we're just about done tonight. I'm getting the signal there.
The hand signal?
So I
Is
would.
it like this thing, like, cut,
Yeah,
cut?
yeah. No, he just plays with fingers over there.
Maybe I can get my
That's Ron
granddaughter to
Perry
come up
on
here
that
and
camera
wave.
there.
Can I get my granddaughter to quickly come up here and get on camera?
there's Sue
And then we'll
Perry.
have her. Come on, Auden. Come on. I want to show all
Hurry
the
up
people
and
of
say
Meriden.
hi.
Come on. You got to turn around and face the
Okay,
cameras.
look at that
This is
camera
my,
and say hi
This
to-
is my beautiful granddaughter, Auden, who's 22 years old. Well, she looks young.
Say hi to
How
everybody.
old are you?
Hello, everyone.
Auden
Thank
is 7
you.
years old, and she is so smart.
Okay.
And she's hungry for pizza right now, right?
I've got to
Look at that,
sign
look at that
off,
tummy.
Len.
Okay. Bye-bye. See, over the camera right there.
Join
see?
us again next week
Right there,
on The
that
Voice
camera.
of the People.
There.
I think I was done before I started that, right?